In 1943, smack in the middle of World War II, things were reaching a boiling point. Hitler's Germany had taken control of a big chunk of Europe, locking up soldiers left and right. These prisoners weren't sitting ducks, though. They kept trying to bust out of the makeshift camps the Germans were throwing together. The early attempts were often successful, because let's face it, these places weren't exactly Fort Knox. Just some military barracks strung together without the fancy cement and iron bars. But then the Germans got serious. Under Hitler's orders, they started constructing top-notch prisons, the real deal. One of these bad boys was called Stalag Luft III. Picture this: military barracks perched on solid stilts, propped up by cement pillars. Underground tunnels? Forget about it. The ground was like soft sand, ready to cave in at the first shovel. And just to make sure no one got any bright ideas, they planted microphones to catch the sound of digging. As if that wasn't enough, they threw up 2 fences laced with barbed wire and stationed guards in watchtowers, keeping an eagle eye on things 24/7. Escaping from this joint? Nearly impossible. Enter Roger Bushell, a British Air Force pilot with a knack for not staying put. Shot down on a mission over France, he'd parachute out like a pro, only to find himself in German custody. He was sent to Stalag Luft. He, with 17 British men, escaped via a tunnel they dug in 1941. But within a week, all of them were recaptured. Now, in October 1941, Bushell made his second escape attempt while being transferred between camps. He and a Czech officer jumped from the train in Hanover and managed to reach Prague, where they contacted the Czech underground movement. Their grand plan: get to Czech and lay low. Now, here's the twist. Czech wasn't exactly a picnic then. It was under German occupation. But Roger and his mate managed to slip through the cracks and find refuge with a local family. These folks were on their side, offering shelter, care, and keeping them hidden from nosy German soldiers. While Roger and his friend lay low, a big-shot German commander got the boot in Czech. Cue the German army going on a manhunt, arresting anyone who even smelled suspicious, sometimes skipping the arrest part and going straight to execution. When the heat turned up and the soldiers started sniffing around the family's turf, Roger knew they had to bail to keep the family safe. Unfortunately, this little getaway didn't go far. They were nabbed quicker than you can say hideout. Even though Roger and his buddy didn't spill the beans about the family's kindness, it turns out the neighbors weren't exactly MVPs. They snitched out of fear, and the German soldiers didn't mess around. The entire family paid the price with their lives. This messed Roger up big time, fueling his fire against the Nazis like never before. Roger found himself in Stalag Luft III, a super fortress of a prison on Polish soil still occupied by the Germans. Remember, this wasn't your run-of-the-mill prison. It was a heavyweight built to cage up the escape artists. But did that stop Roger? Not a chance. The moment he set foot inside, he started weaving a web of connections with fellow prisoners, building a squad. Let's call them the Command Council, 4 guys ready for action. Their mission? Sneak out as many prisoners as humanly possible. Why? Roger had a master plan. Shake up the German power structure. Imagine the chaos if a bunch of enemy soldiers slipped out into occupied territories. It'd be like a game of hide-and-seek on steroids. Most of these guys weren't rookies. They were seasoned warriors with fancy ranks. Roger aimed to distract the Germans, spread them thin, and make them worry about a mess on their home turf, instead of focusing on the front lines. Roger and his crew had a crystal-clear goal: break free from that heavily guarded joint. But with all the fortress-like features we talked about earlier, escaping was like trying to outsmart a chess master. The only way they had was to dig a tunnel, but the guards were alert for such a thing, and they were always looking for any possible tunnels the prisoners might have been digging. Now Roger, being the brains of the operation, hatched a genius move. Instead of going all in on one tunnel, they decided to be sly devils and dig not 1, not 2, but 3 tunnels in different spots. Why? Well, if the guards stumbled upon one, they'd probably think, "Ah, gotcha," and call it a day. Little did they know the boys were cooking up trouble in not just one spot, but 3 at the same time. Here's the kicker, though. These guards weren't your run-of-the-mill rent-a-cops. Nope, they were the real deal. Special Forces soldiers known as the Mongols, handpicked by Hitler himself. These guys weren't amateurs. They were pros trained to deal with tricky prison break attempts. Discovering escape plots, that was practically their superpower. Talk about stepping into the lion's den. All right, so the command council, led by Roger Bushell and his crew, were up against a tough opponent. Keeping their plan under wraps was priority number one. To keep things hush-hush, they got creative. They named the tunnels they were digging after regular folks: Tom, David, and Harry. When they chatted about their plans, they'd say stuff like, "Let's check on Harry tonight," or "Tom's in a good mood," or "How's David doing?" It was like their own secret code. Why the secrecy? Well, prisons had a sneaky move up their sleeve. They'd plant undercover spies among the prisoners, acting like one of the gang but actually working for the guards. These sneaky spies were often newbies or transferred from another prison. But the old-timers had a slick trick to smoke them out. Here's the lowdown. When a new guy showed up, the veterans would have a little chat, asking about where he was from and how he got nabbed. If the new guy claimed to be from London, for example, the old-timers would bring in a trusted Londoner and have them grill the newbie about the city. Weather, people, places, where exactly they lived. It was like a friendly interview to see if the newbie really knew the ropes of their hometown. Now, if the new guy couldn't spill the London beans, it was game over. They'd expose him as a spy to the guards, saying, "Wait, hey, this dude isn't one of us. He's your informant." Then, the guards had a choice: boot him out or deal with the consequences. Crazy enough, this strategy always worked. It was like their secret weapon to sniff out any undercover snitches trying to blend in. Roger needed to sneak out a bunch of prisoners, like a couple hundred of them. But here's the catch. If there were spies in the mix, the whole plan would go down the drain. Now picture this, there were around 600 prisoners in this camp. Roger's goal? Sneak out at least 200. Pulling off a grand escape like that was no walk in the park. Only Roger and his buddies in the command council had the whole plan laid out. The other prisoners who were in on it? Well, they were split into groups, and each group only knew their part of the deal. Let me break it down. One group knew about the tunnel called Harry. Another group just knew about David. Then, you had a group clued in on Tom. The fourth group's job was to gather up the equipment. The fifth group had the thrilling task of getting rid of the dirt. Yeah, dirt duty. Each prisoner had their own mission, and that's all they knew. It was like a need-to-know basis, keeping the details on the down low. The command council needed to keep their moves on the down low. So what did they do? They cooked up a sneaky spy network to keep an eye on the guards, knowing where they were and what they were up to 24/7. They scattered a bunch of prisoners strategically around the prison, kind of like their secret agents. Imagine this, let's say they were working on something important and they didn't want the guards to catch wind of it. When a guard got too close, one prisoner would do a simple thing, like turning his cap. The next guy in line sees it and starts stretching. The third guy sees the stretching and starts scratching his arm. It's like a chain reaction. Each move was like a secret message sent down the line to the last prisoner. Now, here's the genius part. They didn't spill the beans to each other. None of these prisoners knew what the others were doing or what the signals meant. It was like a super secret plan within a plan. This way, they could drop everything they were doing, whether it was digging, getting rid of dirt, or making equipment whenever a guard got too close. It was their slick way of keeping the whole operation hush-hush, even for the folks involved. All right, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of digging. The first snag they hit was the soft ground. Think sandcastle soft. So, to keep these tunnels from caving in, they needed something for support. Their bright idea: snatch up wooden boards from the prison beds. Snag number 2 was, how do you put these boards in the tunnel? Where do you get hammers and iron nails? But no hammers are allowed here. The sound would be too loud, and the microphones planted in the ground would catch them. So, they had to get creative with some genius engineering. They cut the boards in a way that made them look like cubes that could lock into each other. Stack those pieces, and they'd back up the tunnel and keep it from caving in. But here's the kicker. They had to be super careful because one wrong move could send all those pieces tumbling down. Now, you might be wondering, how did they even cut those boards from the prison beds? Well, the prisoners had these ancient music players called gramophones in their cells. They could play music, but the cool part was the metal spring inside. Take it out, straighten it up, and it becomes a seriously strong and sharp tool, like a saw. That's what they used to chop up those wooden bedboards. Once they had all their DIY tools ready to roll, they started digging the tunnels. The tunnels they were digging had to be super deep. Why? Well, if they were too close to the roof, those sneaky microphones might catch the sound of digging. So, they had to go deep, like around 10 meters deep. It wasn't a walk in the park, but it had to be done to keep things on the down low and avoid detection. Once they hit that depth, they had to start digging sideways towards the outside and cross through the prison walls. And get this, they had to go as far as they could, so the tunnel's exit would be smack in the middle of the forest, surrounded by trees. I'm talking about stretching those tunnels to 100 meters or even more. Digging a crazy long distance with these tools and in these conditions makes it more challenging. Now, what makes this whole thing even more wild? They weren't digging just one tunnel, they had to pull off the same stunt 3 times over. Lucky for them, having a bunch of prisoners in on the plan made the heavy lifting a bit easier. Teamwork, you know? The next problem they ran into, the sand. Getting rid of it without raising any eyebrows was the tricky part. So prisoners snagged sand in bags, tucked them into their pants, sneaked out, and tossed them in the veggie gardens they had in the prison. But the most crucial thing in this whole shebang was keeping those tunnel entrances down low. Only the command council and the digger reinforcer crew knew about them. Why? Because if those entrances got sniffed out, the entire plan would go up in smoke. Now remember how those prison huts were perched up on cement pillars, showing off the ground to everyone. So how do you dig into the ground without giving away the secret entrance? Here's the genius move. The tunnel doors were right there in the cement pillars. These pillars weren't just for show, they were used to run underground waterways and power lines. Some pillars were bigger, some smaller, depending on what had to pass through. Let me break it down for you in simple terms. The first entrance, the one for Tunnel Harry, was cleverly hidden under a heating stove in one of the huts. Each hut had a metal stove sitting on a ceramic plate, and the furnace couldn't just chill on the wooden floor, so they put it on top of a cement pillar. The prisoners lifted the stove with the ceramic plate and started digging below the cement pillar, basically making a tunnel right through it. The icing on the cake, the furnace itself covered the entrance. There was no suspicion from the guards because they were the ones who put the stove there in the first place. Now onto the second tunnel, David. This one was hidden in a shower drain, but how did they keep it under wraps? One of the big brains in the command council was a top-notch engineer. This guy worked his magic, whipping up cement from dirt and basic stuff. The color matched the drain floor perfectly. He crafted a cement tile to fit the hole they'd carefully drilled, making it square. Talk about a clever entrance. The third tunnel entrance, Tom, was a bit like the Harry entrance. We're talking about another heating stove setup, but this time in a different hut. Here's the twist. It wasn't on a ceramic plate like the first one. Nope, it was on a cement plate. Things got dicey when the prisoners tried to lift the stove. The plate started to crack. Usually they could switch to another stove in a different hut, but most stoves weren't under cement pillars, and they needed that pillar cover to hide the entrance. The engineering whiz whipped a new cement plate to slip under this stove, but he didn't stop there. He reinforced it with a wooden frame. Even if the guards peeked at it, they wouldn't smell anything fishy. The prisoners managed to lift the stove without a hitch. While it was heating up, some of them slipped down to work on the tunnel. The crew above closed the entrance behind them. And the stove looked normal, without any suspicions. Everything was sailing smoothly for a good few months with the 3 tunnels. Then, one day, during the guard's routine check, the guard happened to be carrying a stick. The stick slipped from his hand and clattered onto the cement plate. That hit made the cement crumble a bit, catching the guard's attention. He bent down to check it out and called over his buddy. They shifted the stove and uncovered the entrance to Tom's tunnel. Once the guards sniffed out the tunnel, the hut got cleared out. They planted explosives along the tunnel and went kaboom. Now, here's where Roger's initial clever move paid off. See, by digging through 3 tunnels instead of 1, the Germans fell for the bait. When they saw all the sweat and effort put into building Tom's tunnel, they didn't even consider that there might be 2 other tunnels of the same complexity and size hiding in different spots. Nope, they assumed all the hard work went into the blown-up tunnel. Instead of tightening the screws on surveillance, they actually eased up. The prisoners were grinning ear to ear about this turn of events. However, another problem appeared. The Germans got this bright idea to expand the prison camp right where they were busy digging David's tunnel. Talk about bad timing. This expansion messed up their plan to have David's tunnel lead them from under the prison walls to the nearby forest. Why? Well, the Germans went on a tree-cutting spree in that area due to the expansion, completely wrecking the exit they had in mind. David's tunnel was a no-go. So, what's the game plan now? The command council put the brakes on David's tunnel and shifted all their focus to the last tunnel, Harry's tunnel. It was a smart move, as they decided to use David's tunnel as a spot to dump all the dirt they were digging out of Harry's tunnel. And now, all the focus is on Harry, hoping this would speed up the process big time. As they work on the tunnels, they must tackle 3 problems. First off, they tackled the ventilation game. The prisoners got creative, crafting a ventilation pipe out of milk cans. They linked these cans together and extended them all along the tunnel. To get the air moving, they whipped up a makeshift contraption using bags. Picture this primitive air pumping machine with several bags at the tunnel's entrance and someone working hard to pump air into the pipe they made. Next was transportation. They set up a railway and slapped a trolley or a wooden cart on top of it. Why? Because as they dug more, the tunnel got longer. And since the tunnel was on the narrow side, moving around in it was a real challenge. If the diggers kept hauling dirt and crawling through the tunnel, it would take forever. With the final length pushing past 100 meters, this railway system became their superhero, helping them work at warp speed. The third problem was the lighting system. The prisoners crafted a lighting system inside the tunnel by getting their hands on some electric cables swiped from workers in the prison. And the workers didn't spill the beans to the guards because they knew they'd catch heat for it. So, the prisoners used these cables and pinched some lamps from different corners of the prison. They managed to connect the cables to the prison's electrical system, and, voila, an excellent lighting setup all along the tunnel. Now that's some serious teamwork and planning. Even with basic resources, they pulled off something impressive, surrounded by a crew with skills in various areas. Now, the tunnel was almost good to go, just a few finishing touches, but they had to get ready for life after the escape. So they kicked off making fake identities and documents. Lucky for them, they had pros on the team who were experts at whipping up official-looking papers. These experts got busy, creating new identities for all the prisoners gearing up to break free. The goal? Make sure they could travel around without a hitch, like hopping on trains and such. They needed photos for these official documents, and the guards held the key to those pictures, so the prisoners got crafty and turned to a little trickery. Some of them were pickpocket masters. They'd sneak up on guard, swipe a card key or something important, and then a buddy would stroll up and be all, "Heard you lost something, pal." The guard, worried about being in hot water with the commander, spills the beans. The prisoners reassure him and say, "Chill out, we just need a few things." Then they ask for photos, stamps, or whatever else might help them create their fake documents. The guard, thinking these pics and stamps won't do them much good, turns a blind eye in exchange for keeping their secret safe. This slick move lets the prisoners snag everything they need to finish forging their documents and identities. At last, in March 1944, after over a year of non-stop planning and hard work, the tunnel was done. The stage was set for the Great Escape. Now, they just needed the right moment, especially when it came to the weather. They weren't keen on making a break on a full moon night. Ideally, they hoped for a rainy one, but luck wasn't on their side. So they shifted their focus to a night at the start of the lunar cycle, aiming for as little moonlight as possible. On March 24, 1944, the Command Council decided that this would be the night of the escape. All the prisoners planning to break free had to leave their huts and gather at hut number 104, where Harry's tunnel was located. The Command Council had a list of these prisoners and checked each person entering the hut. This operation was carried out slowly to avoid raising suspicion. Prisoners began descending one by one through the tunnel, crawling until they reached the end. However, at the tunnel's end, there was no exit yet. Roger decided they wouldn't dig the exit until the actual escape night to prevent guards from noticing prematurely. The frontline prisoners reached the tunnel's end, which was dug to the surface with a ladder in place. But a nasty surprise awaited them. Their calculations were wrong. The tunnel didn't open into the forest as they thought. Instead, it was only about 50 meters from the prison fence and watchtowers. There was a high probability that if they emerged, armed guards would spot and shoot them. Despite this setback, the Command Council members at the front decided to proceed with the escape. There was no time to back out. Slowly, prisoners started emerging from the tunnel one after another. The process was slow, encountering numerous problems that night. A power outage darkened the tunnel, and a section even collapsed, requiring repair. Several unexpected issues occurred, making the prisoner extraction process exhausting and time-consuming. It lasted from 10 p.m. until 5 a.m. Unfortunately, by 5 a.m., the sun began to rise, and prisoners were still emerging from the tunnel. Until 5 a.m., 76 prisoners had successfully escaped, dispersing in different directions within the forest. After 5 a.m., 3 more prisoners came out, but guards noticed them. Quickly, guards surrounded the tunnel opening with weapons. The last 3 prisoners surrendered, raising their hands, and were recaptured. The remaining prisoners inside the tunnel, realizing the plan had been exposed, attempted to retreat back into the prison. In the end, out of the 200 prisoners planning to escape, only 76 made it. Nonetheless, 76 is still a significant number. Unfortunately, despite their efforts, most of these escaped prisoners faced arrest within 72 hours, with many found just a few kilometers away from the prison. While a few managed to successfully escape and return to their countries to rejoin the war, others, including Roger Bushell, the leader of the escape operation, were not as fortunate. Roger attempted to board a train using a fake identity, but strict inspection procedures post-escape led to his discovery and subsequent arrest. According to international humanitarian treaties, prisoners of war are expected to be treated humanely, usually facing punishment rather than execution for escape attempts. However, this time, escaping from the formidable prison infuriated Hitler. Initially contemplating executing all prisoners and punishing the guards and commanders, he eventually settled on executing 50 prisoners, personally overseeing or even carrying out some of the executions. Hitler's extreme anger stemmed from the fact that these prisoners had escaped from his most secure prison. Despite the less-than-ideal outcome, Roger's plan did succeed in diverting the attention of German forces and leadership. The distraction plan achieved its goal, and Roger, even in death, found relief knowing that the disruption he aimed for had been accomplished. Oops, we have come to the end of our story. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video. Ciao.